I think one of the things that you've written on this, and I forget when you wrote it a week or so ago, is maybe the most sensible thing for the league and this independent referee in this case, the independent adjudicator in this case, former federal judge Sue L. Robinson in Delaware. Maybe the best thing to do, quite honestly, is to split the baby and to say, look, we know you're getting suspended for some number of games. We just don't have finality on the civil cases right now. So we're going to suspend you for 4 games this year, and we're going to hold it in abeyance and make a further judgment on how much, if any more, we will suspend you in 23 or 24. And what you said a minute ago that is, I don't want to even say frightening to consider, but I am borderline positive that Jimmy Haslam, D. Haslam, Andrew Barry, Kevin Stefanski, when they sat down and thought of worst case scenarios, they must have thought, okay, well, at the absolute latest, a year from now, we'll be finishing with this case. Sometime in the 2023 off season, April or May, maybe June, this will end. And then we will have our quarterback in full for the last 4 years of this contract. Okay? And now what you just said before, when you said that this is going to last all of this year, all of next year, and into 2024, unless there is a global settlement in these 23 cases, how frightening must that be to a team that now has to decide? Can you imagine making this decision at the end of this season after you finish 8-9? And again, whatever. Do we have to do better than Jacoby Brissett as a backup quarterback? Because now we're not sure at all what's going to happen next year. I mean, this is such a quagmire for the Cleveland Browns, and beyond Deshaun Watson. And Mike, you have also said this, and I think you're right. He needs somebody. Deshaun Watson needs somebody to basically tell him the truth. He needs somebody close to him to say, hey, listen, you've got to do everything in your power right now to admit some fault, to do whatever, to fall on whatever sword, to stop saying I've never disrespected a woman or whatever his quote was about it. You got to get real, because there's a world out there that doesn't believe you. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest why the world doesn't believe you. So I mean, I don't even know the point of what I'm saying other than to say.
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely
Watson,
right, because it was a point I was going to make.
Yeah. Yeah, well, Deshaun Watson needs somebody to tell him the truth, and the Cleveland Browns are in for a 24-month nightmare from today, I think is fair to say.
I think I've said this before in the context of this case. One of the biggest challenges when you practice law in a litigation setting is to separate what you say in court or how you conduct the actual effort to defend or push the rights of your client. Separate that from what you say to your client back in the confines of your office or your conference room, where you have the tough talk with your client about the weaknesses of the case. Because the client gets caught up. The client loves it. The client loves having someone fight for them. And they hear everything you say in court, and they get all excited, and they get hardened in their position. That's when you got to take them back and say, hang on there, Jimmy. I was doing what I had to do there. Now's where we have the conversation about why we need to think about settling the case and where you may have some responsibility here and why it may not be as good as I was trying to paint it as, because that's where I'm your advocate. Now I'm not your advocate. I am your friend. I am your advisor. I am your counselor. I am telling you what needs to be done. And Peter, either Deshaun Watson hasn't gotten that kind of tough love very blunt advice, or he's gotten it and he's consistently ignoring it because he's 26 years old. I know what I would say to Deshaun Watson if I had the opportunity to sit down with him in a room for a half hour to an hour. I know exactly what I would say, I know what questions I would ask, and I know what points I would make. And the bottom line is this. If you are going to go from person to person to person to person to get massages, and you're going to admit that at least 3 of those massages became sexual encounters post-massage, you have to understand how that looks, especially when 23 women are now saying you went too far. You did, and there's no one there to vouch for you. And if this is true, and there's always little nuggets you can point to. There was one allegation that really doesn't seem important in the latest lawsuit, but it's critical. The woman who sued him this week said that he specifically wanted no one else in the room. Okay, that's one thing that I would grab onto that with Deshaun Watson, and I would say, Deshaun, is this true? Just tell me right now. But you and me in the room, is it true that you said to her, just the 2 of you? Well, yeah, it is. Okay. Look, you got to understand. It's over at that point. You've created a situation where you got 2 versions of what happened in that room because there's not a third person there to break the tie. So we got to accept what she's saying. We got to understand what she's saying, and we have to realize we're going to go to court, and she's going to say it. We may disagree, but she's going to say it. And this isn't going away until she gets her chance to get her day in court and say it. And that's why we need to resolve this case right now for a fair amount. And that's why, and you could do, I'd work through every case with him, why we need to resolve these cases. And also the other side of it, Peter, the point you mentioned. The Browns, now look, the organization is getting what it deserves here. The fans don't deserve this. The fans get mad at me for saying these things. Hey, I'm your advocate here. You don't deserve to have this dark cloud hanging over your team for 2 or maybe 3 seasons. All because the Browns had to have Deshaun Watson, and Deshaun Watson has to have his 23 days in court. This is not a burden that the Browns fans should have to carry, and they're the ones that I feel bad about in all of this. Other than whatever it is that happened and wherever justice transpires with the 23 individuals, obviously I feel bad for them if their claims are accurate and truthful. And I'm not saying they aren't. I'm just saying, hey, we need to be fair and balanced here. But the Browns fans, they're just minding their own business, trying to get themselves thinking their team's going to be any good. And now they've got to carry this around indefinitely, this notion that their quarterback may or may not have done these horrible things and may or may not be available to play football.
You know, the one thing that you've talked about in recent weeks and that has come up a lot, Stephanie Apstein of Sports Illustrated has raised this issue, and I think wisely. Does the NFL, even in a tangential matter, have to consider what Major League Baseball did with Trevor Bauer? And a lot of people would say, well, whoa, what Trevor Bauer did, goes into the violent realm, according to the charges. So no one claims with Deshaun Watson that he physically injured anybody. Mentally is another matter. But be that as it may, where do you come down on that, Mike?
Well, I think it's highly relevant because this is all driven by public opinion. The personal conduct policy is a PR tool. 98% of the employers in the country don't care because it's not their business what happens between an employee and the criminal or civil justice system as long as you can show up at work. Now, there are exceptions to that, and there are employers who want to hold against an employee some issue they got into away from work, and I've had to counsel employers, you can't worry about that. That's not your business. It has nothing to do with why you employ the person. But the NFL has made it part of the employment relationship. The NFLPA has allowed it because the public is asked to embrace this product, to pay money to this product. So if there's a person who has done something that the public regards as vile, the NFL needs to have a mechanism for dealing with it. So yes, it is relevant, and what the expectations of the public are and how people react to Trevor Bauer And whether or not that's viewed as excessive or not excessive, that all goes into the stew that's going to determine what Roger Goodell thinks the right punishment is. And the one big similarity between Bauer and Watson, even though the facts are different and the Bauer facts are very graphic and disturbing, the one similarity, Peter, is consent and the extent to which consent was violated by the man involved. In Watson's case, it was in the context of a massage. How much consent was there to activity, and was it violated? And with Trevor Bauer, it was a different context where there were consensual sexual activities. How much consent to whatever kind of rough actions happened was provided, and whether and to what extent it was violated. So I think Trevor Bauer is highly relevant to this. And the fact that Rusty Hardin would argue it has no relevance whatsoever tells me he's afraid it has relevance, because it points to a year at a minimum for Deshaun Watson if the NFL takes the Trevor Bauer case seriously.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.